Okay, guys. So since we have a lot to do, I want to get started. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I haven't used these headphones before. Good? Okay, perfect. All right, so the focus question is, how does the atomic bomb help America break through and beat Japan? So you got a little preview yesterday. I want to spend a little time here focusing on the Pacific front and how our strategy in the Pacific front led us to make the decision to drop the atomic bomb, which is easily one of the toughest and most controversial decisions in American history, at least one of the top ones. All right, so America used an island hopping strategy in the Pacific to beat Japan. So I know you're not done with this slide. I need to go to this other slide here to help you out. So everything in red is in the Pacific Ocean and is owned by Japan in by 1941, 1942. So New Guinea, the Philippines, okay, all of these small islands here, pretty much every couple of months, there's going to be a new battle. Okay, you can see the Battle of Saipan, the Battle of Guam, and our goal in the Pacific is much different than versus Germany. Is we want to go to each island and try and take back each island. So we just get closer and closer and closer to eventually we get right off the coast of Japan. And there's two very intense battles, one called the Battle of Iwo Jima and one called the Battle of Okinawa at this time. Okay, so the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, if you notice, are right off the coast of the mainland of Japan. Okay, so the Battle of Iwo Jima specifically, all right, is in March 1945, and this was a very tough, gruesome battle. There's a very famous photo of the Marines here on the bottom right holding up the American flag, okay, as you could tell here. So this was a huge, huge victory for the Allied powers. The one just south off the coast of Japan is Okinawa. And this is a very intense battle that the Allies eventually do win. But here's the thing. You have to understand these battles were so gruesome and so tough that over 240,000 Americans and Japanese soldiers were killed during these battles. All right. So though America and the Allies win both of these battles, it comes with a huge loss of life. All right. This is worrisome because the United States hasn't even reached the mainland of Japan yet. They haven't even gotten to the mainland of Japan, and they're having battles where over 100,000 people are being killed. All right. So we need to now make the decision. Do we invade Japan, option one, or option two? Do we come out with the secret weapon we're developing? Okay, so we have a very tough decision we need to make. All right, so let's go into this next slide here. Okay, take a minute, copy this down. This is known as the Manhattan Project. Okay, and we'll talk about the issue that's coming forward now. Okay, so our secret weapon is something being developed by two very famous scientists. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Albert Einstein. Okay, he's a very famous scientist in history. And another one is Robert Oppenheimer. And their team of scientists come up with this idea. Now, guys, I don't know science very well, so I'm not even going to pretend to tell you. But basically the idea is if you take the smallest particle, smallest matter. You go to the nucleus of it, you have an atom. And if we found out if you shot enough energy through the atom, you can create a massive explosion, one of which we've never seen before. You can have Mr. Lardo maybe explain it. You can, look it up on your own, but I don't know how the process works. But we found out a way to do this. After testing it out, we realized that this is a bomb that is bigger than any bomb ever used before. And we say and have this idea that, maybe this could be used in war, despite it being extremely devastating. It becomes very clear that after Iwo Jima and Okinawa, that Japan is not going to surrender anytime soon. They're willing to fight the whole way. And you have to also know a little about the Japanese soldier. The Japanese soldier was basically trained to never surrender. It was more dishonorable to be taken as a hostage or a prisoner. Yes, Liz Mel, yes. It's almost the same as being, how do I put it? It's worse to be captured in Japan than it is to be killed in battle. It's more honorable to be killed in battle than it is to be captured. So Japanese soldiers were expected to fight to the death, and they went into a war believing that they would die. They would not really return home to their families. So they are a very tough, ruthless group to fight. Okay, last slide for now. I'll give you a last area for now. All right, take another minute, copy this down. Okay, so remember, FDR does pass away in his fourth term. He dies of a stroke in April 1945. So President Harry Truman has to take over towards the end of World War II, and he's tasked with this very tough decision. Hopefully you saw in the assignment yesterday the reasons why he did it. So he had to make the very difficult decision of dropping 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, which would kill 225,000 soldiers and civilians from Japan. Okay. So I'm going to play a video, 3 minutes long or so, just kind of showing you what the bomb looks like and would do. But while the video is playing, I want you to think about this question. Okay? Why did Harry Truman make this choice, and was he right in this decision? I don't need you to answer it right now, but I want you to think about it. And I want you to try and look at both perspectives. Look at it in he was correct and he was right, and look at it and no, he's not right. And think about which one makes the most sense to you. Okay, so we're going to see how this bomb dropping looked, what it did. Okay, we're going to look at how the first bomb was dropped in an area called Hiroshima, Japan, which is where the first atomic bomb is dropped. Okay, you'll see what it kind of looks like, and we'll go from there. All right, so here it goes.
And I was counting. 1, 2, 3.
I was wiping the desktop. That was when the bomb was dropped.
It took about 45 seconds from the time the bomb left the airplane until it exploded. And I think there wasn't a man in the airplane that wasn't either timing it with his watch or counting or doing something. I was sure the bomb was a dud. I was sure it wasn't going to work.
After falling for 43 seconds, the time and barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. A uranium bullet fired down a barrel into a uranium target. Together, they started a nuclear chain reaction. Solid matter began to come apart, releasing untold quantities of energy.
Okay, so you have a sense of what it does at this point. You saw the mushroom cloud. You see what happens to people if they get caught in the blast. They essentially just evaporate. I don't even know what to say. If the bomb drops near you, it's over. The buildings are going to be extremely damaged, as you can tell. I mean, this is as big of a bomb as ever seen before. So I told you to think about that question. And if you were someone who believed America was not justified in dropping the bomb, if you would like to unmute yourself and share first, you guys can go first. If you want to put it in the chat, I'll give you a minute or two to do so, to put your perspective on, you know, were we justified on, you know, putting this bomb into place? And if your answer is no, please unmute yourself and let me know. In between. Yeah, I guess a lot of people will be like that. Or go ahead.
So I understand why they did it, because they realized they haven't even reached the mainland of Japan, but I feel like this was not justified. Like, I understand that they didn't reach the mainland of Japan and realized they're going to lose a lot of men, but that was not justified dropping a bomb, 2 atomic bombs, killing over 225,000 people, which the majority of them in the reading it said were civilians, if they were only trying to attack soldiers. So I feel like that was just not justified at all, because instead of killing soldiers, the majority of people that died were civilians who didn't do anything.
Very well said. I think Anicia had her hand up, I believe. Go ahead.
I don't agree with this at all, because like it's like a war. So I thought that if they were gonna drop this bomb, it would be on like the people in the army or like whatever forces they're in.
Military target, right.
It's like their job to die. Like, I don't, like, it's sad like if they did die from it, but it's like kind of like their job. The civilians are like doing nothing. They're not involved in the war. And I think that was like kind of like a really bad decision. Didn't they apologize afterwards, America? Like,
Not necessarily like to the Japan and like to say that, you know, dropping the atomic bombs was a mistake, but they did apologize just in general of just killing civilians. So yeah, you're kind of correct in that.
Medals to like the people who were hurt from it, or like have like really bad.
Correct. All right. I think Neve and Gentiana had their hands up.
Okay, so a lot of people gonna hate me for this, but I don't care. I stand in what I say. So I agree. Okay, I see where everyone is coming from, where they say that it wasn't justified. I think it was justified. It's tit for tat. It's war. What do you expect? If you're coming for someone else, you should expect that another person's gonna come back at you. Should they have died? Civilians? No, but you gotta lose to gain. So I know this sounds so mean, but I think it was justified. Because if you think about when Japan dropped their bomb, didn't they do the same thing? They also harmed civilians too. Yes, it was on like the military base as well, but they harmed civilians too. If you can harm our people, why can't we harm yours? So yeah, they did what they had to do.
Yeah, I think Anicia pointed out that there were a lot more soldiers that died. Only 68 were civilians, but yeah, there were civilians too. So that is true. Again, Tiana, last thing, and then we just got to move on a bit.
So I agree with the fact. Well, I understand why they attacked Japan, because they wanted to get revenge and stuff like that. But in the reading, it said that he wanted only to attack the military bases, which when I read that, I didn't think it was possible because people would try to help. Yeah, people try and help around and they were still gonna get killed. So I don't think this was justified either.
Okay.
Like, even though it's a war, you gotta be careful and like make sure that what you're doing, it's the only thing that you can do.
Very well said, guys. You guys said a lot of good things. And this is something, guys, we wanted to debate for the next 3 days we could. I mean, this is a very complicated, topic. So let me give you this question. What can justify dropping an atomic bomb? You guys have kind of answered this and thought about it in your own way. I know Maheen said some things as well in the chat, so I appreciate you guys sharing. From the region's perspective, it is an American history region. So the American history perspective is that, this is going to sound crazy, but let me finish. The atomic bomb, despite killing 225,000 people, was actually there to save lives. Okay? I know that's crazy to think about, but the idea was, by our military experts and by the people in our country, their prediction was that if we invaded Japan, over 2 million would be killed. Roughly over 1 million American and definitely over 1 million Japanese. So if they were looking at how the battles were going and they hadn't even gotten to the tough part of the mainland of Japan, they actually predicted that there would be 2 million killed. So this was actually justified by saving lives. And if you just look at the numbers, we had 244,000, 240,000 killed in just Iwo Jima and Okinawa combined. So this kills 225. About 40% of them are innocent civilians. That is really, really sad and obviously is horrible. But the idea was that in the long run, this would save lives. This is why it's such a tremendous and horrible decision. It's so tough because you know you're going to kill a lot of people. And you know a lot of those people are going to be civilians. But the way this war has gone on, it is almost, I guess Neve said, I don't know if tit for tat's the word, but it's like, this is what the expectation is. So this is the region's perspective. So we need to know both, but definitely know the region side of it too. I'll give you the questions in a second. I had shown you this before, but just to show you, World War II, more than half of the 70 million people killed in World War II, 70 million, okay, by far the most. More than half of them were civilians. So with the atomic bomb dropping, killing civilians, it's almost like at this point, well, over 30 million innocent civilians have been killed in this war. All right, it's almost par for the course, so to speak. Doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong. It just is the perspective of World War II. All right, so take a look at these regions questions so you can see how the regions kind of handles it. I think the first one's obviously easy, but then the second one's going to give you more of that perspective from the United States. So shortly after entering World War II, the U.S. began the Manhattan Project to, very straightforward. One is correct. Just work on the development of the atomic bomb. President Harry Truman's decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan was based on the belief that the action would also what? Save American lives. By avoiding invasion of Japan. Now, the worst thing that could have ever happened was we dropped the 2 atomic bombs. Japan doesn't surrender, and now we still have to invade. That would be the worst case scenario. But we took the calculated risk. We said, if we fight them, they won't surrender. But if we unleash this bomb and let them know we have it, they may have a differing opinion because they can't defend against it. So we unleashed what we had. Now, there's a third aspect of it that's related to the Cold War that I'm not going to get into yet. I'll come back to it. There is a third kind of reason. But this is the major reason why we decide to do it. And, whether you agree with that or not is always open to debate. Okay? I don't need you to write this slide down. I just need you to listen. 2 days after the atomic bombs are dropped, Japan is decimated from the attacks. Their cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are in ruins. America definitely has the little bit of a revenge factor from Pearl Harbor. I think it was Neve that said it, maybe Maheen as well. Just we have that revenge factor. And the way I know that is when we were talking with Japan, they had given us peace medals while we're talking through, and then they went behind our backs and bombed Pearl Harbor. We attached those peace medals to the 2 bombs. All right, so we definitely had a revenge factor on our mind for what they did for Pearl Harbor. Can you compare 2,500 killed to 125,000? No. Okay, you obviously can't. But there was that revenge factor that was put into place. Once Japan surrenders, World War II is officially over. We're actually going to sail out a boat called the USS Missouri, which I've been to. It's in Hawaii right now. That particular boat is going to be sail out to the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese leaders are going to get on it, and they're going to sign their surrender on September 2nd, 1945. And on one of the parts of the boat, there's like a little spot dedicated to that particular area, all right, where, you know, the Japanese signed the surrender. All right. So I would like to now get to the assignment. We're going to get into World War II oversimplified part 2. So everyone open up that Google Doc. I will try and get through as much as we can. I'm going to move quickly. All right, this way we get through as many of the questions as possible. But where the video kind of stopped last time, we were working on, basically Germany was in full control. Okay, they were in all control of Europe. Part 2 is all based on the way the war kind of changes. Okay, and starts moving in the favor of the Allied powers. So preview questions 1 and 2, keep an eye on the chat. And we'll answer them as the class goes on.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other Allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed a defensive tripartite pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America.
Can be moving at a fast pace. Number 1, Tripartite Pact. That was what was signed. Number 2, Italy was really bad at fighting this war. Okay, they really relied on Germany. They were not good at all. All right, and that's going to weigh on Germany as this war goes on because Italy can only beat like very small countries in Africa. Anytime they fought like a real, true military power, they had no chance. All right, let's keep going to 3 and 4.
When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might." And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked for, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons." America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pikecrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pikecrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pikecrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. Then they tried to make a pikecrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea.
Hey guys, it's Destiny Lachey.
In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, you know, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine, keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift." "Perfectly normal, keep going." Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come.
Okay, so number 4, we should know Hitler, one of his biggest mistakes was invading the Soviet Union. He does very well early on, no doubt about that. But number 5, what ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave this one for you guys. What changed everything? Okay? He said in the video it got stupid cold, but what that means is winter set in. And you think it's cold in New York? You've never been to the Soviet Union when it's cold. It gets freezing cold there, and Germany was not prepared. Hitler refused to accept that his soldiers were slowing down and told them to keep fighting, and this really hurt them. Okay, so now they're fighting out a war on the Soviet Union in a very tough type of battle. All right, let's keep going. Take a look at 6 and 7.
To a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire Sixth Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for...
Okay, 7 is the Battle of Stalingrad. A lot of historians say, guys, that if Germany wins the Battle of Stalingrad, they're going to win World War II. All right, because they're going to have just too much power. So this is a huge victory for the Soviet Union and a huge victory for the Allied powers. I hope you guys catch the little him shooting himself in the foot type of analogy they keep giving in the video. It's interesting. They keep doing that for a reason. All right, take a look at 8 and 9.
For Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again, then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well.
Okay, so Italy's out. Okay, once they get invaded, pretty much by Britain and the United States, they can't handle that. So they, Benito Mussolini gets toppled from power, and Germany has to go in and defend them. So Germany's now all over the place in Europe trying to help out. All right, take a look at 10 and 11.
Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive the likes of which the world has never seen before invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied...
When there's a big war going on somewhere in the universe, that always reflects on the market.
Ships fired a huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick." Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again, he gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima. Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press, to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the two of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one. Wow, Churchill.
All right, and that's how it ends there. When World War II ends, we have a very, very cold war coming into place, and that is number 14. And that is how we start off Unit 7. So we still have a couple things to do for World War II. We have to look at the United Nations, which comes after. We have a review video, but start thinking your test is going to be next Tuesday, 6 days from now. So you might want to start getting prepared a little bit. It's going to be on the Great Depression and World War II. I'll tell you on that Tuesday after the test, Abigail. It is not during winter. It lasts 47 years. All right. Guys, you can go. I'm sorry we went so fast there, but I want to get you guys no homework. Have a great day.
Have a good day, Mr. Benio.
See you later.